Picture walking into a neighborhood bar where simply being yourself could get you arrested. Not because of violence, not because of theft, just because of who you loved. On a humid summer night in June 1969, police officers entered a small bar in New York City's Greenwich Village, expecting another routine raid. Similar raids had happened for years, and people usually scattered without resistance. But this night was different. Someone refused to leave. Another person shouted back. A crowd gathered outside. Within hours, the streets erupted into one of the most influential protests in modern American history. The events surrounding that small bar would inspire marches, reshape civil rights activism, influence laws across multiple countries, and eventually become what millions now recognize as Pride Month. This is the story of how one ordinary night became extraordinary. Before rainbow flags filled city streets and millions gathered for annual Pride celebrations, countless Americans lived behind an invisible wall of fear. During the 1950s and 1960s, same-sex relationships were illegal in many states, and public attitudes often forced gay men and lesbians to hide their identities from family, employers, and neighbors. A rumor alone could cost someone a career, housing, or military service. In Washington, the federal government carried out what became known as the Lavender Scare, dismissing thousands of employees suspected of being homosexual, believing they posed security risks during the Cold War. Across the country, police regularly raided bars known to welcome LGBTQ patrons, checking identification, making arrests, and publicly exposing those inside. For many, simply finding a place to gather without fear was nearly impossible. Yet, beneath that atmosphere of secrecy and pressure, quiet communities began to form. In apartments, coffee houses, and hidden bars, people found friendship, support, and the hope that one day they could live openly. Few could have imagined that one small bar in New York City was about to become the center of history. In the heart of New York City's Greenwich Village stood a modest establishment known as the Stonewall Inn. From the outside, it looked unremarkable, but for many LGBTQ people, it offered something increasingly rare. A place where they could gather, dance, and feel a sense of belonging. The bar operated without a liquor license and was controlled by members of the mafia, who saw an opportunity to profit from a community that had few safe spaces and little legal protection. Raids by the New York City Police Department were common, and patrons had come to expect that an evening could end with officers checking identification, arresting employees, or detaining anyone accused of violating morality laws. Most of the time, people quietly complied, hoping to avoid public humiliation. But on the early morning of June 28, 1969, another police raid began, just like so many before it. Officers entered, expecting a routine operation. Instead, they encountered something they had not anticipated. This time, the crowd outside did not disappear. It grew larger, louder, and increasingly unwilling to accept what had become routine. As police escorted patrons from the Stonewall Inn, the mood outside shifted with every passing minute. Instead of quietly walking away, people stopped to watch. Friends gathered. Curious neighbors joined the crowd. What began as a few dozen onlookers quickly swelled into hundreds. Witnesses recalled hearing cheers as some of those detained resisted arrest, while others challenged officers with words instead of silence. When tensions escalated, objects including loose coins, bottles, and debris were thrown toward the police. The officers retreated inside the Stonewall Inn, barricading themselves as the crowd pressed forward. Protesters overturned parking meters, built makeshift barricades, and set small fires as chants echoed through the narrow streets of Greenwich Village. Additional police units were called to regain control, but the unrest did not end that night. For several evenings, demonstrations continued as thousands gathered to demand dignity, equal treatment, and an end to the constant harassment that had defined daily life for so many. A routine police raid had become a turning point that neither side had expected. When the crowds finally dispersed, the anger that had erupted outside the Stonewall Inn did not disappear. Instead, it transformed into organized activism. In the weeks that followed, new groups such as the Gay Liberation Front emerged, bringing together people determined to push for greater visibility and equal treatment under the law. Unlike many earlier organizations that had often worked quietly behind the scenes, these activists believed change required speaking openly, organizing publicly, and challenging long-standing discrimination. Soon afterward, the Gay Activists Alliance focused on lobbying elected officials, supporting local campaigns, and pressing for legal reforms. Community newspapers spread news across the country, connecting people who had long believed they were alone. Meetings, demonstrations, and public discussions began appearing in cities far beyond New York. For many participants, Stonewall was more than a protest. It became a symbol that fear no longer had to define their lives. What had started on one city block was quickly becoming a nationwide movement, inspiring thousands to step out of the shadows and demand to be seen, heard, and treated equally. Nearly 1 year after the Stonewall Uprising, organizers wanted to ensure its message would not fade into history. They proposed a public demonstration unlike anything the United States had seen before. On June 28, 1970, thousands gathered in New York City for what became known as the Christopher Street Liberation Day March, honoring the street where the Stonewall Inn stood. Rather than hiding from public view, participants walked openly through Manhattan, carrying handmade signs, chanting for equality, and demanding recognition of their civil rights. Similar marches took place the same weekend in Los Angeles, Chicago, and San Francisco, marking the first coordinated Pride events in American history. While the crowds were modest compared to today's celebrations, the significance was enormous. Simply marching in public carried real personal risk. Some participants feared losing their jobs, being rejected by family, or facing harassment simply for being seen. Yet they marched anyway. That first anniversary transformed Stonewall from a local uprising into a national movement, establishing a tradition that would continue to grow with each passing year and inspire communities far beyond the United States. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Pride marches spread far beyond the streets of New York. Cities across the United States, Canada, Europe, Australia, and many other parts of the world began organizing their own annual events, each shaped by local culture and the legal realities of the time. As the movement grew, Pride became more than a commemoration of Stonewall. It served as a platform to advocate for equal treatment, challenge discrimination, and build visible communities. During the 1980s, the HIV/AIDS epidemic profoundly changed the movement's focus. Pride events became places to honor those who had died, educate the public, raise funds for research, and demand greater attention from governments and health officials. In the decades that followed, activists continued pressing for legal protections, military service opportunities, anti-discrimination laws, and, in many countries, marriage equality. At the same time, Pride celebrations evolved into large public festivals that attracted millions of participants and spectators each year. What began as a local protest had become a worldwide movement with many voices, goals, and traditions. Today, Pride is recognized around the world, but it no longer means exactly the same thing to everyone. For many participants, it remains a celebration of identity, community, and the progress achieved since the days when simply gathering in public carried the risk of arrest. For others, it is still a protest, highlighting issues such as discrimination, violence, and unequal treatment that they believe continue to affect LGBTQ people. Over time, many Pride events have grown into major public festivals featuring parades, concerts, local organizations, businesses, and corporate sponsors. That growth has also sparked debate. Some critics argue that commercialization has overshadowed the movement's original purpose, while others believe broader public participation reflects greater acceptance and visibility. Views also differ on how Pride should be celebrated and what role it should play in modern society. Regardless of those differing perspectives, its origins remain rooted in the events of June 1969, when a routine police raid unexpectedly became one of the defining moments in the history of civil rights. Every Pride parade traces part of its story back to those streets surrounding the Stonewall Inn. The first Pride March was never intended to become a global tradition. It was organized as a remembrance of one extraordinary week when ordinary people chose to stand their ground. From the streets surrounding the Stonewall Inn, the movement spread across cities, countries, and generations, evolving alongside changing laws, shifting public attitudes, and ongoing debates about equality and identity. Today, millions participate in Pride events each year, while others view them through different cultural, political, or personal perspectives. Those conversations continue, reflecting the complexity of a movement that has grown far beyond its origins. Yet history returns us to the same place where it all began, a modest bar in Greenwich Village on a summer night in 1969. Few of those gathered outside could have imagined that their actions would influence laws, inspire movements around the world, and become part of the broader story of civil rights. History often turns on moments that seem ordinary until they are viewed through the lens of time. Stonewall was one of those moments, and its legacy continues to shape conversations about freedom, equality, and the meaning of belonging.